When we talk about navigation in CSS, we really can be meaning anything from a horizontal navigation to a vertical navigation, etc. Now, I still have this particular file open from our last lesson, and if I scroll up to the top, I see that I have an area over on the side for my link 1. So with my cursor over here in my file, I see that I have over on the side my CSS for that particular navigation. So I see that I have a ul.nav, ul.nav.li, ul.nav.a, ul.nav.a.visited, and then hover and active. So this is some really fairly simple CSS, doesn't require any JavaScript, etc. on my page. Even if I were to add some JavaScript to this, which would only give me some sort of effect, I want to make sure that the CSS works great first, and then I can think about what other types of effects that I would like to add to my page. So for instance, I'm going to click on Live View, and when I roll my cursor over these, I see that I have a rollover effect, that the whole entire area that I'm rolling my cursor over is changing so that I know that it is indeed selectable and a link. If we add something like this to our CSS, we want to make it as obvious as possible. I will uncheck my live view, and if I go back over to my code with my cursor in there, I see that I have a UL tag. It has a class style of nav to it. So like we talked about in our last lesson, we want to utilize how these are set up in our tags to begin with, and that's how we will then style them over in our styles panel for our CSS. So I have a UL and it has a class style of nav. So then I have UL.nav because it's class style. If it were an ID, it would be UL $nav. I'll go back over to my design view. So that is given a list style of none, so that gets rid of my bullets. And if I were to get rid of that here and click back in my page, you will then actually see the bullets pop up. So I will type that back over here so I can actually see my bullets. It has a margin bottom to it, and in my LI it's given a border bottom, so my UL has the top part to that particular border, and my list items then have a bottom to them because they don't need the top, they just need the bottom because the UL just has the top part to that. My ULA is what's actually styling the look and feel of those items. It's a block display, so that's what's making the actual block element around those particular links. I have my padding to make sure that nothing sits too close to the actual link itself. So when the user's cursor rolls over it, there is an area that we have as a hit state for that particular link. And I'm given my width in there as well. And my hover and active has a different background color and a different color to the actual image. Let's open up another file and get rid of that. Make sure I can see what I'm looking for over here, and in my files panel there is a links.html. If I actually click on my live view, I see that I've got a background image in these. And when I roll my cursor over each one of them, then my background image shows up instead of the image when I don't have my cursor rolled over it. And I actually have a drop down. So how did we make this? So let's take a look at our CSS panel and make sure I can see this. So let's take a look at the code first. So I'm going to take off my live view, and then I'm going to look at the code. So I see that I've got a div container wrapped around everything. Then I have a nav list UL. Now all these are IDs. They could certainly be class styles. It really doesn't matter. One way or the other, both will work. And I see that this is the end for my UL. Now we'll take a look at our code view a little bit later on, but if I click this little button right here, this little select parent tag, then I can see my element. Then I have my list item. Now if I go back to design view for just a second and click back on live view and I roll my cursor over my about, you'll see that I have a drop down menu. So again, I will uncheck that and go to my code view. So I've got my first part of that particular item. And if I take a look to the side here, you'll see that I don't have the end part of that tag. I do, however, have the end part of that tag right here. So inside of that then is wrapped another unordered list. So this is my sub-nav list. So this is the drop-down part. Now in my regular link, you'll notice that I also have an active and a current ID in here. This is so that I could add some more code and have that part of my tag look different than the rest of my links. So when the user is on a particular page, then they know by looking at the navigation as well as the page what page they're actually on. The same thing goes for my sub-nav. I also have a sub-active and a sub-current, which means that when they're on that second level page, that they would be able to tell what page that they're on from there as well. I finish off my LI tags here, and my UL, and then my LI, and then I just have my regular list items. So I go back over to my design view, and we'll click back over in live view for a second, and let's take a look. So I have a nav list and a nav container. My nav container has a height to it. If it doesn't have a height to it, then it looks like it isn't really a part of everything else. So for instance, if I were to get rid of this and I click on my inspect button, so now when I roll my cursor over particular elements, I see there's my nav container, and because of my color coding, it's hard to see my other elements. But I can see my padding in there and the container itself. So I've got padding and margins in that one also. So I'm going to undo my inspect and just turn back on my live view again so I can actually see the effects that I'm looking at. I'm going to go ahead and click back on nav list. You'll notice that it doesn't have anything in here at the moment, but I could always add something here as well. If I wanted the whole entire container to be a color, for instance, I could choose to add that if I'd like inside of my UL tag there. So how do I want my link to look inside of here? I have my font weight normal. I have a decoration of none, making sure that I don't have an underline in there anywhere. And I have a text transformation of uppercase. Let's take a look at that really quick. And I'll see that if I were to change this to capital or something like that, and let's just click OK because I'm in live view, I won't be able to see it otherwise. And now I see, because I typed everything with just all lowercase, then I have the capability in CSS to make it look however I want it to look. So I will take that back to uppercase, and now that's uppercase again. So then I've got something that might freak you out just a little bit because we have commas in between these items. So basically what that's saying is my nav list itself, my UL with my nav list, because this is a list that has other items to it. So my first UL and then the second UL and then the LI in there, I would like for them not to have a list style, and they have no margin or padding. My regular LI has just a float of left, so that is what allows all of my items to then float beside one another. There's another technique that we could use in that case, and that would be my block style of inline would move them to the side as well. My nav list LIA is where all of my images are coming from. So I have a background image and I have a background color. Now my background color is there just so that we can see it inside of our Dreamweaver page, and so that if something were to happen with the image, if the image were to be misplaced in another folder, or the worst case scenario happening, then at least it has a color behind it. I have a border color, I have a font color, and it has a little bit of a margin right to keep them from being pushed against one another, and it has a little bit of padding as well in it. Now the next I have my nav list hover and my active state. So this is what is giving the rollover effect, and so I've got a different image inside of my hover and active state. Now I've got my sublist, and it has a display of none, so that when you're just looking at your page like we are right now, in my live view, you're not actually seeing that. So if this were a display of any other kind, then you would actually be able to see that drop-down menu sitting there on the page. But because we have it as a display of none, we don't see it. In my sub-nav LI, in my sub-nav list LI, I have a float of none. So it's not trying to float to the side. We have to declare that there because we have a float left on our regular list item. So now I have a sublist of LIA, so the font inside of my sublist. Now it looked a little weird having it the exact same size as the rest of my font on that page, so I made it just a tiny bit smaller. It doesn't have a margin to it, but it has a little bit of padding to it, so that I've got some room around the edges of that particular item. How do I want my hover and my sub-nav list to look? I want it to have a display of block so that it looks basically the same as my other links. And it has a padding bottom and a top to it. It has a position of absolute. My positioning of absolute is so that I know exactly where that is going to fall when I roll my cursor over that. Now I've got my LI hover and my subnav list A, and it has a border and a block and a little bit of padding, and we need to actually give that a width. So when I roll my cursor over here, that is what's giving that width, that 10M. Then I have my hover subnav list AB4. Now that is just so that for my content, my property is just 2 colons in a row. So that's what's giving that little extra personality to that particular drop-down link. It doesn't have to be there for any reason whatsoever. I just thought it looked nice. So now we've actually seen 2 different types of navigation. We saw a vertical navigation and we've seen a horizontal navigation with a drop-down sub-nav, both done with strictly unordered lists.